Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for another terrific edition of Deborah Kobylt Live. And we're just going to get right to it. On the phone with me right now, calling me from Toronto, is KJ Howe. KJ, you are a kidnap and ransom expert. You're also the author of the new thriller, Skyjack, and we are so thrilled to have you. I got to tell you, after talking to you on the phone yesterday for a little pre-interview, I'm scared to even leave the house and travel almost anywhere.
Well, there's no need to be scared as long as you're prepared.
No, I'm being a little silly, a little facetious, although this really isn't a very funny matter. Because as we discussed, I mean, we travel pretty much anywhere. I don't have much of a fear of going many places. But, you really enlightened me. We've got to be careful and very, very diligent when we go traveling to other places that are. Let's talk first about places that are right now on the watch list. Like if you're going there, you got to be careful. What are some of them? You were telling me about that yesterday.
Absolutely. So Libya is probably one of the hottest spots for kidnapping right now in the world. Yeah. If you go to kjhowe.com, my website, there's actually a map, and you might want to check that before you plan your next vacation, because it rates each and every country in the world with a zone of either high risk or low risk. Another surprising spot that's challenging is the Philippines, as well as Mexico. It's really grown now due to the drug cartels. Kidnapping is really proliferated.
And that's
Aruba, for example. Go ahead.
That's pretty much anywhere in Mexico, right? Including if you're going to the Cabos of the world, where most people I know go on a vacation. They really do have to be careful, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Generally, if you stay within your resort, that's the best choice. But at the same time, there's different sections that are higher risk than others. For example, some people I know in Mexico City who are very wealthy and at great risk for kidnapping joke around about their feet never touching the ground because they fly from one helipad to another.
How do you go to a country and do that, though? It's almost, it's a little scary. I mean, you want to go to Mexico City, for example. They have one of the finest museums there. Let's say you decide to go there on your vacation. What do you do, though, to be careful? You were giving me a list of things that you really ought to do and look out for.
Absolutely. So don't take taxis. Try and get your hotel to arrange for a trusted driver to drive you around. That's one of the best things you can do. Travel in a group. Don't go alone places. Instead, travel with several people and be very aware. I think situational awareness is a great term to use wherever you travel, and that is to keep your eyes up and looking around. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. So, get out of the situation immediately. And make sure you tell everyone back home your itinerary so that what you're doing when, so that if something happens, they know where you last were. So there's many things you can do. And really, basically, it's just trying to be savvy. And also, make sure you look for travel advisories before you travel to a country so you know exactly what you're going to be dealing with.
But a lot of people, they just don't realize this. I suppose another thing to do is... shouldn't you always tell a friend, or always at least don't leave the hotel by yourself? Don't walk around alone. And this goes for men and women, right? This goes for pretty much anybody.
110%. Exactly. I think that, men shouldn't be overconfident because, if someone's trying to abduct you, and it also depends whether it's an, abduction of opportunity or a targeted abduction. And those can really, be a very different cats.
Right. So what's the difference? Because I know it used to be back in the day, it used to be business executives that would be kidnapped for ransom, or government workers. And now it's pretty much anyone, right? The adventure seeker, just journalists, missionaries, pretty much anyone.
Exactly. So, like back in the day, kidnapping was really a real concern for people of high net worth that were traveling internationally, or executives overseas. Like let's say Coca-Cola had people in Mexico,
right.
There'd be a risk there. But these days, people who go for hikes or adventures, people that are trying to, help others, like aid workers, missionaries, all are at risk because what happened is kidnapping is proliferated because of two reasons. One is that terrorists are using it as a fundraising mechanism, which is a very sad state of affairs. The second reason is that in developing countries, military and police are turning to kidnapping as a way of putting food on the table for their families because they're not getting a wage. So this is the situation.
And, traveling to developing countries only just started within the past few decades, and it's become so much more commonplace. So you're right. I think a lot of times people don't realize it, or they think they're going to be okay. And really, as you said, anyone is at risk. Now, kidnappings are up, right? I think, what did you say, last year there were 40,000? That's a lot.
That's correct, and those are the reported kidnappings. But I also want to make sure that we're not fear-mongering, I'm an avid traveler myself. I know you are too.
Right.
And I think take the right precautions, and just safety conscious and have that strong situational awareness. And there are certain times where you shouldn't go to places, right, when the advisories go red. So just make sure that you plan ahead and that you're really cautious, but go enjoy yourself. The world's a beautiful place to see.
It's true. And, just getting back to what you said about sometimes even law enforcement, they're involved in some of these countries because they will never really make the money that they need to live a certain life. I remember when we were in Egypt, we had a guard with us, and he was so kind, and he stayed with us for most of the trip. And he told me that in the high season, he would make $400 a month, but generally he would be making $40 a month, $80 a month. And he said all he ever wanted since he was a little kid was to get out and see America. But on the kind of money that he makes, it will be absolutely impossible because to get a visa to get out of there to see America was just too expensive. And that really broke my heart. I felt so badly for him. And then I thought to myself, gosh, he'll never be able to leave because he doesn't make the money. So I suppose when you think about it, you're saying a lot of people do it because they need money to put food on their table and what else. They're constricted by their government, so they probably just feel like they have no choice.
Yeah, and it's a matter of perspective, isn't it? Because, if you make $40 a month, anyone, in North America looks like a multimillionaire in perspective.
Anyone.
And, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. So we are all at risk in a sense. And the problem is this. In the U.S. and Canada, for example, you have a 95% chance of getting caught if you're kidnapped. You're a kidnapper. And, the penalties are incredibly stiff, 20 years plus. But if you could contrast that with Mexico, where you have a 95% chance of getting away with the crime and making good money, and the police and federales quite often are in on it, you can see what the problem is. It's a lack of prosecution of the crime that is just going to proliferate.
Generally, what happens when a person is kidnapped? I'm almost afraid to ask, but look, knowing that it could happen, and you said also Aruba, which is also a very popular destination for Americans to go to on a vacation. What happens? Generally, most kidnap victims are returned, are they not? Safely?
The great news about this is that 90% of kidnap victims come home safe and sound. So your chances of survival are very strong. It's incredibly important to make sure when you're kidnapped, first of all, they're going to probably give you what we call a welcome battering, which is a way of, kind of enforcing compliance. They want to immediately assert who the boss is so that they don't have problems dealing with you. And so you have to be prepared for that. And
so what do you do? You just comply and do whatever and just look down? Should you look down? Should you look in their eyes? Should you plead?
Yep. So a couple of things. You don't want to completely avoid eye contact. You don't want to engage in eye contact. It's kind of a blend between, because you don't want to be confrontational. That's the worst thing that you can do because you're looking for trouble that way. And also, you want to be humanized, though. That's really important. You want to make sure that they see you as a person, not just, a commodity. So that's why, some kind of just basically being somewhat compliant, but not too compliant, because then they just get, overzealous and domineering with respect to you as a hostage. So that's really what you need to do. You immediately have to start, like you could be there for a lengthy period of time, weeks, months. You need to start a routine and keep both your body fit, eat everything they give you, and to keep your strength up. And as well, you need to keep your mind active. And a great example of that is to build your dream house down to the last stitching in the pillows.
What does that mean? I'm confused by that. What's that?
Yeah, sure. Basically, so what you're going to do is you're going to imagine, and stretch your mind for imagination to build your entire dream house room by room so that you're keeping yourself occupied. One of the worst things you face when you're in captivity is boredom. And boredom can often lead to losing hope. So you really have to keep hope alive. For example, we talked yesterday about Peter Moore, who was the longest held hostage in Iraq.
Right. He was the IT expert, correct? How long was he held for in Iraq?
Almost 1,000 days, but 946 days. And, it's a traumatic experience. But what Peter did, which was brilliant, a couple of things. He was chained to a radiator, but the wall beside him was filled with cracks. So he used his mind to create an entire train system that he was able to replicate on paper when he got back. And
Oh,
by
wow.
doing that, he kept his mind really active, and engaged. And that's what I was talking about. He also had a filthy pillow, and he did job interviews with his pillow to keep himself social and engaged as well.
Job interviews with his pillow?
Yes, yes. And the pillow, didn't always get the job.
Wow, that's incredible. So tell me a little bit about Skyjack. Why did you write this? I know that it's a
Sure.
series, right? A series of thrillers that you're writing. This is number 2 in the series?
That's correct.
Okay.
I created a character named Thea Paris, and she's kind of a female action hero. And, we have Jason Bourne and James Bond, but it's really nice to have, a strong girl. And she is an elite kidnap negotiator. So I spent the last 5 years immersed in the world of kidnapping and ransom so that I could learn everything I could about this subject matter for the series. So Thea Paris, she's a very personal motivation for being a kidnap negotiator because her 12-year-old brother, when she was only 8, was taken in front of her. And so she decided to be a kidnap negotiator so that she could help other families bring their hostages home. And in Skyjack, she's taking 2 African or former child soldiers from Nairobi to London when the plane that they're on is hijacked, and the adventures begin from there.
Yeah, I mean, don't give too much away, but even just hearing that, it's so suspenseful. What a great read. What a great read. Your first book, what's the title of that and what was that about?
Sure. The first book is called The Freedom Broker, and it was a lot of fun to write because it was basically letting people know about Thea Paris. Now, Thea also has type 1 diabetes, and I thought this was a really important thing to include because not a lot of lead characters have physical ailments, and yet there's so many people out there with chronic illnesses, myself included.
Right, and you
So
told me
I
that.
want-
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I feel like it's profoundly important that, people, especially young people with illnesses, realize that, it doesn't have to stop you from pursuing your dreams or, going for your, the career you'd like to pursue. And these days we have like NFL quarterbacks like Jay Cutler, who with type 1 diabetes, doing well, a load of musicians and actors. And so you can really do anything. So in The Freedom Broker, I basically tell Thea's personal story. And during that novel, her father is kidnapped, and he's a very, very wealthy oil magnate. And so it's a really powerful personal story just to get the reader oriented into Thea's world.
Wow. I mean, these are exciting. They are great summer reads, and they go by very quickly. Very, very interesting reads. I love this. Now, you said you did lots of research into the world of, kidnapping on both sides, correct? Who did you interview? Pretty much everyone, right? People who have been kidnapped, those who work in the, getting back the kidnappers, right? How was that? How did you go about doing that?
Phenomenal. It's truly changed my life, this experience. I've met what they call, I call them freedom brokers now,
Right.
but their technical title is response consultant. And there's about 25 to 30 people in the world whose full-time job it is to fly to hotspots and to negotiate for the release of hostages and bring them back home. And so I have basically, built, a contact list of people who work in this field, including several of these freedom brokers who I've become good friends with. And it's been, really eye-opening to see what's going on in the world, how this is a huge business, a multi-million-dollar business. And it's certainly not going to go anywhere because, sadly, what happens is if there's always a commodity, which is the way they think of humans, which is very sad.
It's frightening.
And people,
yeah.
and people who want to pay for that commodity, then you will always have kidnapping there.
So how do you? Go ahead. But then I do want to ask:
Okay.
how do you negotiate with a terrorist, someone who's got your loved one held captive?
Well, the key thing is to realize that obviously there's different types of kidnapping that I explore in different books. But in the kidnap for ransom scenario, what you're talking about, is what you want to do is start off a conversation and go back and forth. Now, usually they'll ask for some astronomical sum to start. But in general, what you get is 10 to 15% of the original kind of ransom demand is what you end up settling for. It's incredibly important to make sure that you negotiate, cry poor, try and make it, stretch it out. Even though you're dying to get your loved one back as soon as possible, you need to stretch this negotiation process out. And the reason why is because if not, you could end up having a double, which is like, let's say they'll say, hey, look, give me this much money, and you give it to them, and they say, that's wonderful, that's a down payment. Now let's talk about the real ransom.
Whoa.
So you really have to make it sound like you squeezed every dime out of your pockets.
Do you call law enforcement? God forbid you get that call that your loved one was taken. What do you do? I mean, you're sitting at home. They're asking for money. Obviously, you ask to speak to or hopefully take a look at your loved one who's hopefully alive. And then what? Do you just negotiate? I know you say stretch it out, but how do you involve law enforcement?
Well, definitely. Okay, in the U.S., there's a new group that was spearheaded by former President Obama called the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, HRFC. Wow. Okay, so the first thing you would do is call them, because any Americans kidnapped abroad, they'll be handling it. And this group came about because James Foley, and Steven Sodeloff and all these journalists who were kidnapped by ISIS, their families realized they really weren't being supported, and they didn't know what the left hand was doing with the right hand. There was too many, people in the pot. So what they did was they created a multi-agency group, the HRFC, and it has, State Department, CIA, FBI people in it, and they all work in conjunction to help bring Americans back home. Now, that's the government organization. Quite often, my character works for a private organization. And how they work is they're usually hired by insurance companies, and most multinational, companies that are having people abroad have K&R insurance on these people. And so these insurance companies have the freedom brokers on speed dial to come out and help whenever they're needed.
Wow. It's just pretty
It is a fascinating world.
Yeah. But generally they get their money, right? They do get their money. It's a negotiation, you're saying.
Yes, very, very much so. Most kidnaps are, based on ransom demands and negotiating. And these kidnap, companies that are independent actually have figures that sort of give averages of what, like, let's say an executive kidnapped, in Nigeria at this level is worth. And they kind of know what they're negotiating for.
Oh my goodness. So what's is there a base that people ask for? Like $1 million, $10,000,
It actually varies dramatically, and it's a great question because, it's really intriguing to know. But, for example, in Mexico, there are ransom demands as low as $500, okay? But, in certain countries, they'll start off with $1 million, $2 million.
Wow.
So it depends.
And I guess the answer is not to avoid these countries, but just to be really, really careful, right? Go out in groups. Change the way when you're coming out of your hotel. Change the direction of how you go, right? Don't look down and look at your phone as you're walking. I remember you said that to me, which makes lots of sense because you need to be aware as you're looking around, correct?
100%. And also, body language is a key thing in life.
Yeah.
Picture yourself as a kidnapper. You don't want to be going after someone who's standing tall and strong and broad and looks powerful and aware, right? You're looking for the person that's slumped over, hunched over their phone, completely oblivious to the entire world. So keep that in mind when you're walking around to make yourself a hard target rather than a soft one.
Men or women are more at risk?
Truly, these days, both. It used to be very male-dominated, hostages, right? They used to be generally, but these days, not at all. There's many, many women who are taken. I've, had the great pleasure of meeting a lovely German girl who was taken in Colombia by FARC. And, she had a really tough experience. And so, absolutely, it's equal opportunity, sadly.
Very interesting to me how all of this experience in your work with Kidnap and Ransom led you to writing this thriller, Skyjack, and, of course, your other book. And I also wanted to mention you're also the executive director of Thriller Fest, right? What is that?
Yes, it's a wonderful conference, and I invite everyone listening to come join us. We're having George R.R. Martin of Game of Thrones fame as our special guest this year. And just picture 1,000 thriller writers descending on New York City at the Grand Hyatt in Manhattan for
exciting.
An entire week of celebrations.
That's exciting. And what happens there? They talk about writing thrillers. Do they read from their books?
Absolutely everything. We have writing school for people who are aspiring authors. We have pitch sessions. We have over 60 agents you can pitch your book to. We also have spotlight interviews, cocktail parties, and a variety of things. Basically, it's a celebration of anything that thrills.
That's fantastic. You're a fascinating woman. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know that you grew up, you did a lot of travel as a kid, right? Which is sort of what whet your appetite for this kind of work, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very lucky. My father worked in telecommunications, and we lived, in Africa, Puerto Rico, Saudi Arabia, Europe. And for me, when I was going to write a book, I knew I wanted to set it internationally because, heck, I really enjoy travel, and I want to go to these destinations so I can really bring the authenticity to the page.
Yeah, really, really amazing. I think you're just a very fascinating person, KJ Howe. And your website is, if you can repeat that for everybody.
You bet. It's very easy. It's kjhowe.com, and I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Okay. And your book, Skyjack, available Amazon and anywhere else, right? They can take a look
Barnes
at it.
Noble, independent booksellers. I actually just got back from a wonderful 12-city tour in the U.S., and anywhere you can buy books, you can find it.
That's wonderful. And of course, the Thriller Fest in New York City, that's coming up as well. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's actually been very enlightening. I mean, I think people hear about, kidnappings and they don't quite get it. It could be anyone at any time, and you just have to be careful. If you're traveling to these countries, it's probably a good idea to probably look up what you have to say over on your website. I think it's smart.
Absolutely. Just, be cautious and I think, wise in your choices. And if that's the case. And also, if you ever have any trouble, give me a call. I'll reach out to my buddies.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. Okay, thanks again for joining us, and we will be in touch.
Thanks so much for having me on, Deborah. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Wow, Kurt. Scary stuff. I mean, everybody knows that I like to travel pretty much anywhere. And it's good to know. I mean, she actually gave some great advice that I never even thought about. I walk around thinking, nothing will happen to me. But you don't know. You're a target and you're walking around. And she's right. People are making so little money every month. They look at you as a meal ticket. So good to know, everybody. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.